Are you concerned about managing your career in the age of AI? If so, stay tuned for the rest of this conversation. I'm Adrian,
And I'm Devin.
and we are the team at Success Labs. So, Devin, one of the things that really prompted us to have this conversation was an interview I did with a business publication that was running through some of the headlines we're hearing. And at the end of the interview, the reporter said, I've got one final question. Am I going to be okay? And that really hit me because I hadn't realized how much all of these headlines are impacting people. So could you kind of run through some of what you're hearing and seeing with clients and what you think the state is right now?
Yeah, I think it's really hard not to be impacted by the noise and lots of coverage around AI and warranted, right? I think we're all using it. We're all trying to figure it out. I think the plethora of headlines that are hitting us.
Like, what are some of the headlines?
uh, AI is coming for entry level jobs. That's Wall Street Journal. The bottom rung of the career ladder is disappearing. New York Times. Um, AI threatens millions of white collar jobs, Goldman Sachs. Your job may not exist in 5 years, CNBC. And so I actually do imagine that many people scrolling their social as they do, that hits you at the wrong time after a rough day, right? It can be pretty scary and worrisome, honestly. So I think most people are a little worried for themselves. I think if you've got a business, you're a bit worried for your business.
Yeah. One of the people I think about is our intern, Isabella, who's, job hunting right now. And in some ways, I think we'll talk about this more in a minute. I was job hunting in 2008, financial crash, really an unstable time. So there are things that have happened before, and so I'm interested to hear your perspective on that side of it. But this does feel like a different moment in time, and I think there's two kinds of questions that people ask right now. One is is AI real? Like, is this a bubble? Is this hype? Is this really happening? And I think that's harder to answer, right? So, like, let's just assume for now this is real because we're seeing businesses react in a real way to it, right? It's impacting hiring decisions, it's impacting strategy. So, then the other question that I think is on the table is, can you have career security in this environment? Will you be okay? Can you make sure you're okay? And so that's what I'd love to dig into in the conversation today. Um, I'd love I think, yes, career security is still possible. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with the first thing you said, which was about, is it real or not? And I would say, 100%. I think it's just the scope and the speed
Mm.
of impact. And then the second part of it is, right, it's AI, and AI is the headline, but AI is just change at the end of the day. And I think we've always, sometimes more, sometimes less, had to navigate changing environments. I think there have been really good times for job search and careers and promotions, and I think there have been dips, and that's been, you talked about 2008.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about late 80s and through mid 90s when there were lots of mergers and acquisitions and downsizing, right? Like there are these periods of time, and one of the things that we said, or I used to say way back in the 90s, was, look, specific job security is probably not a reality, right? The idea that you have job security. But I think career security is still very much something that we can position ourselves.
What is the difference?
I think job security is like, I'm gonna have this job at this company, and there's gonna be a certain amount um, of being able to count on that things won't change too much, and that if I work hard, I can have this job security. And I think that's what everybody wants, right? If I do these things, if I work hard, then my job is secure. And the flip is that job security, specific job security is probably not very real. And why is that? Because things are always changing, whether it's AI or something else. What changes? I think that technology, whether it's AI or something else, has always changed. The um, customer changes, and the I think expectations and market also change around you. And so even within a role or within an organization, jobs change. And then they can change in big ways. But I think career security, the idea of career security is that if I do certain things that it might not be this job, but I will have a place in the market and I can navigate a successful career. Might not look exactly like this particular job. We won't be static, but I can position myself for career security, even in a dynamic environment.
Yeah, I agree with that. Um, so, so I do feel some comfort that this is not the first time that this has happened. I think that knowing that there are some proven tools and tactics that you can bring forward that are going to help you navigate this rapid change, regardless of if it's AI or something else. And so there's three things that you have told me help a person be able to effectively manage their career in AI. And so I'd really like to dig into those. The three that you've shared with me before are mastery, so being really excellent at what you do and staying ahead of the curve. Reciprocal relationships, which we'll dig into how that's different from just regular relationship building, and then being able to effectively demonstrate your impact, or how are you really driving results, impacting the bottom line, adding value to your organization, and being able to articulate that in a concrete way. So let's start with mastery. What does that look like to you?
When I used to say it in a really simple way when I was working with people, I'd just say, like, you need to be really good at what you do and you need to be ahead of things.
Yeah.
Meaning if there's the newest um, technology or system or process, whatever that is, are you familiar with it? Can you use it to add value in your organization right now? And sometimes that is really as simple as keeping up, right? Knowing what's out there, having some at bats and practicing a little bit, being able to say, yeah, actually, I've done a little bit of that. Let me take it. Sometimes I'll frame it up as I'll tell people, pay attention to the new stuff and get involved in it. So the
Mm.
people who pay attention to the new stuff and get involved in it can create space for themselves and organizations. So I think being good at what you do is really about keeping up, reading about the new stuff, testing out the new stuff, saying yes to something that's coming out. All those things will help you be, when they look at the group of people and saying, you know what, Adrian, she's already down that road.
Yeah.
She's going to be a person who can help us move this business forward, even with all the change.
One of the things in video gaming that we would say is ahead of the curve. So, like AOTC, be ahead of the curve. Specific tactical things, I think, let's say you're in accounting. Would you advise an accountant to figure out how AI is impacting accounting and changing accounting and experiment with those tools?
100%. Should be reading about what's happening in accounting, what is AI doing, how is it helping people, whether that's from analysis to building your spreadsheets and pivot tables. And instead of being scared of that and doubling down, it is saying, "Hey, I know about this, and actually I'm gonna play with this and use this." Probably need to let somebody know, like, "I built this with AI
Yeah.
just in case it
Yeah.
doesn't look that there's something because we're still playing with it. But if you're the person on the team who says, absolutely, I'm using this to be more effective. This is what it can do for us. And by the way, things that took us, a month before, we can do this in 36 hours now. And those are the people that are going to be able to add value because they are getting ahead of the curve. And, we called it mastery, but with a caveat, I will say that the thing about a changing environment and new things is that, and I think that's what's hard for people is mastery doesn't look like maybe being the expert at first. It sometimes being really good at what you do is to be a novice again. And that's an interesting way to think about it
Yeah.
because the very nature of change and the very nature of applying new skills is that at first you're not a master, you're not an expert. And in a new environment, sometimes the master or the expert is the one who is willing to be a novice again.
I think that's a great point, and one of the things that I keep advising clients to remember is nobody's an expert with this technology right now. I mean, it is evolving so rapidly. You know, I do trainings on how to use um, ChatGPT and Claude and these chat-based AI tools for teams. And I have to update my presentation almost every 2 weeks because there is some new model released or some new tool that's available. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is just stay abreast of it, keep experimenting and keep playing, and think about how you can apply it to your day to day job. And that subject matter expertise in what success looks like in your job is what's going to help you be successful adopting these tools.
Yes. And I think on top of that, depending on who you are, also paying attention to organizationally, where's the focus?
Yeah.
And, if you know it's part of the strategy or it's important to the organization, that is your clue that you should be, researching, looking, trying to figure out where this is going. And not everybody will do that. So the people who are willing to do that, who can embrace that and be uncomfortable with the idea that they're in new territory and it'll feel weird not to be an expert because think about, it's a lot of experts who are saying like, "I'm worried.
Yeah.
I'm so good at this thing." So,
Okay, let's talk about reciprocal relationships. And I think the first thing I'll ask is, everybody understands relationships are important, right? Especially if you're on a job hunt. But what do you mean by reciprocal relationships and how do they look different from just maintaining normal relationships or a broad network?
I think by nature, reciprocal relationships are deeper. Just the idea of reciprocal, it's one where I feel not just like, "Hey, I know Adrian. I see what she posts on LinkedIn," right? I say hello to her at events, I see her out in the community, but it's the idea that I have the kind of relationship with you and you with me where I'm very comfortable calling you for information, for advice, for, "Hey, do you know anybody?" And I trust you for that, and I feel comfortable with that, and vice versa. You also feel like I'm someone who you can call for information, advice, help. "Hey, I'm looking to talk to somebody in healthcare because we're doing this new project. Who should I be talking to? I'd love to pick your brain on this." And I think not everybody has a lot of those kinds of relationships. In fact, I think probably the environment we're in has lent itself to a lot of people thinking that all those people that they follow or like on social media are real relationships. And in
Yeah. They call it parasocial. I mean, it's a parasocial relationship. It's not a real relationship, right? And I think one of the things that I'm seeing, you know, at first it was really just young people, but I'm seeing it more and more with adults as well, is this idea that just because you know somebody, you should vouch for them or they're going to vouch for you. And it takes getting burned only once or twice to figure out, don't do that. If you haven't worked with a person, don't vouch for them unless you feel really confident that you know them, but you need to understand that other people are making that calculus about you, So I always say, like, look at your volunteer experiences as, people are always watching, you know, um, in your friendships, be intentional and thoughtful. It's not just your professional relationships, but I'm curious, how does somebody start solidifying a relationship in a more meaningful way, moving beyond that kind of parasocial surface to a deeper reciprocal relationship?
I mean, I think it's reaching out. I think it's sharing air a little bit.
What do you mean by that?
Well, especially with people who you do have access to. No, we don't with everyone, right? Distance is dead. We can have relationships with anybody in the world all the time, and so that sharing space with people doesn't have to be necessarily always in person, but I think it's great if you do have that access. If you don't, I think it's still about keeping up, right? Like, how often do we check in on people, see how people are doing, to maintain the kind of relationships. I will say that last week I had 3 people reach out to me just asking for advice, or "I wanna talk something through with you," and I'm almost always people are always I find that people are always happy to help,
Mhm.
and but that just deepens the connection, right? Anytime we have one of those conversations, it just deepens that connection. We're so busy. We have so little time. We spend too much time doing, I think, mindless kind of things that feel like connection, but really aren't. So I can spend time on Facebook or LinkedIn or Insta and like things, but that's not really deepening the relationship. I know what's going on, right? I'll see people and they say, "Oh, catch me up." And they'll tell me some things. I'll be like, "Yes, I saw on Facebook." But it's really, and I think it's especially hard right now. So when we talk about reciprocal relationships, I think we also have to talk about how hard it is to do that right now, because I think a lot of things make us fake feel like we have deep relationships.
Yeah, so one of the ways that I gauge, are they calling and asking me for help? Would I feel comfortable asking them for help? Is one just easy litmus test. Um, you know, would I ask them to recommend me for something? Would I confidently recommend them for something? I think that's an important question to ask yourself and ask honestly, like, would you feel uncomfortable in that moment? And if you would, what can you do to strengthen that bond? And I think it's especially important right now because as I'm working with HR teams, they are getting inundated with resumes that look perfectly tailored to the jobs because of AI, right? And so referrals are becoming the number one way people are placed in jobs. And there's the whole I forget what you call it, the like quiet market. I want to
The
say
hit
black market,
the
the hidden
hidden
market.
job the hidden job market,
Yeah.
that will be really, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's gonna be really important, because when you've got a bunch of resumes, all, like you said, that are perfect because they put them through Chat or Claude or Copilot or whatever they did, it will be the call that gets made, which I made one the other day, that says, "Hey, this person who I worked with, they sent you a resume, and you should talk to them."
I had that happen this past week. So there was a job that looked closed. And the hiring manager, the woman that was hiring, texted me and said, I've struck out. I really don't want to reopen. Do you have anybody that you think would be a fit? I could think of probably 3 people that I thought were a fit. 2 of them had applied to this job and they got screened out because they hadn't answered the questions in exactly the right way or they didn't look like a complete fit on paper, and I said, "You need to go have a conversation with them." And so they're both having interviews this week, and that's what I'm talking about reciprocal relationships, and the reason that I felt comfortable saying push those people to the top of the pile even though they didn't meet your baseline criteria is because I've worked with them before. I know their work ethic, I know their work product, and I understand the job that is being asked, and I know that they could meet, the expectations of that role well.
And then they trusted you and said,
Mhm.
"If Adrian says we should talk to these people, we should 100% talk to them."
That's
And
right.
that's partly about them trusting you, and it's also about your discernment about who
Yeah.
you'd say that for,
Well,
like
that's
you
right.
talked about earlier.
I mean, and that's what's hard is I've had people that I've had to say, "Look, I don't feel comfortable recommending you for this, and here's why." And I'm always transparent about that, but not everybody's going to be transparent with you. I have been on the validating side of a hire, calling references, and I've had somebody just totally roast a candidate, and I thought, "Man, I wanted to go back and tell this person, just so you know, stop listing this person as a reference. It's a bad idea." You know? So you've gotta really have a hard reality check about who you're considering a reciprocal relationship.
So there's this thing that I used to do in job search workshops, because turns out back in the early 90s when people were doing layoffs and downsizing, I did some of the big mergers and acquisitions. So think ExxonMobil and some big bank where they'd be acquired. And so as part of that, right, dating myself, I don't think people do this very much anymore. We did what they called outplacement or transition. And so you'd be working with the executives who'd been downsized and laid off. And it was hard, right? Because so much of their identity was caught up in it, like we are today, too. And in many cases, they felt like they'd help build the organization. So it could be devastating. And so we'd work with them on like, first, get your mind right for your job search, but also prep for job search. And one of the things when I would talk about having, hey, obviously you were experienced the fact that there is no job security, no matter how good you are, but there is career security, and here's how you get it. But I would ask them, I would describe reciprocal relationships. And you got to remember, this is back in the 90s. So this seemed like maybe this doesn't seem like a very big network. But if we really put the caveat of reciprocal, then maybe it does. So I would ask, if I'd have 20 people in this workshop, I would say, how many people feel like they have really strong reciprocal relationships with 200 people? And I'd really try to get them to think about that. Now, this is before social media is super big. So having a strong reciprocal relationships with 200 people was probably pretty good. And people would think, and usually about 20 people, maybe a handful raise their hand, sometimes less than five. And then
That I mean, I think I would have to really sit and think through 200 people that I'd feel really confident having a reciprocal, trusted relationship with.
I would ask the question of these people. I would look at them and say, okay, John, if you lost your job tomorrow, how worried would you be about your next job? And inevitably, these few people that would raise their hands would say, I'm not worried. Some would even say, I could have a job by next week. That's how solid they felt about their skills, but also who they could tap into that would help them find and know where to look and how to get in organizations. And my guess is a lot of these people were already being recruited in some kind of way or had been, and they were just going to plug back into that network. Um,
I think that's a great place to leave reciprocal relationships. I love that. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on to the last one. So we've talked about being really great at what you do and ahead of the curve. We've talked about building reciprocal relationships. And now the last one that you've talked about is being able to demonstrate impact, particularly related to kind of the bottom line or the priorities of the organization, like you said earlier, creating some visibility. So talk to me about why do a lot of high performers kind of struggle here? I hear people feel uncomfortable with the idea of self promotion. I think sometimes people struggle with the gap between doing great work and translating it effectively. I see that when I'm reviewing resumes a lot. So, talk about where people get this wrong and what getting it right looks like.
I think a lot of people are not good at being visible about their accomplishments in a way that is productive, right? Like, not visible in a bragging kind of way, but really being able to show this was the problem or this is the situation. Here's what I did. Here are the skills that I used. This was the impact. And that's kind of a little formula for writing quantifiable accomplishments. I still see, you can't imagine when I do look at resumes, and somehow I do still end up looking at resumes, how many people, when they go to share, which is really a marketing piece, list their responsibilities.
Talk about the difference between responsibilities and impact, because I think that's what confuses people.
Yeah, so I can be responsible for a bunch of things. It doesn't mean I'm any good at those things. So if I'm just taking the job description and saying, "Hey, here are the things that I'm responsible for in my role." Okay, like, so who cares, right? I know you're responsible for these things, but how do I know you were any good at those things? And that's where you're translating and going from responsibility to impact and accomplishment. And so I can say I'm responsible for da 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 North America, blah 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 blah. But it's better if I say, led the startup of a new product line launched in the South that went from startup to a quarter of our sales and production, in 18 months. if I see something where you've quantified your accomplishments, what I think is, well, if you could do that there, then maybe you can do that here.
Mhm, connecting the dots. One thing I always tell people is look at scope and scale. So quantify what's the scope of the responsibility and what's the scale of the challenge. So what was the budget of the project? How many people did it impact? Um, talk to me about, I'll give an example of when I did this when I was kind of a twerp early in my career, but I'd love to hear some more examples of how people can elevate this outside of the resume. So one of the things that I did when I was inside of an organization, I like sometimes I look back and I can't believe I did this kind of thing, but I created my own annual report and I put my whole team in it. I had pictures with my team and then I had quantitative and qualitative data for all of our wins and how it impacted the bottom line. So I had, the shout outs that each person on the team got that talked about how great they were. But then I also had, we added this many tens of $1 million to the pipeline. We were responsible for identifying this many million plus prospects. We were accountable for driving these dashboards that led to these initiatives, and spelled it all out with charts and graphs. And I printed it out in color and I left it on all the executives' desks and I left it on the tables at the board meeting without even asking. I just gave it to all the board
I wanna
members.
know how that went for you.
It went great, actually. I ended up getting promoted, but I think that not everybody has that level of audacity to do that, and that may not be appropriate for everyone in every organization, right? I also had really great Canvas skills and it looked good. But what would you say to somebody who's not gonna go make their own shiny annual report and isn't in a job search and not looking at promoting it on their resume? How do you create visibility in other ways?
I think there are opportunities to be visible about accomplishments, even inside our organizations. I think we spend so much time talking about what's not done and what hasn't been done. So you think about meetings, you think about, you know, staff meetings, board meetings, right? It's all about often about what's still left to done, what's still left to do, and what hasn't been done. So while you might not create your own annual report, I think thinking about and quantifying what is it that me and my team, so in a lot of cases it's not just you, it's this whole group or department or team, and being able, just like you did, being able to say, what did we accomplish, what were our goals, what do we move forward, how can I share that and talk about that, whether that's in meetings where there's an opportunity to do that that's appropriate, whether it's with my boss, staying aligned with, hey, this is what's, I know this is what we agreed to, this is what success looks like, these are our KPIs, here's where we're at related to that. Just keeping up with it so you can verbalize it, so that you can use your performance appraisal, so that you can use it on your resume. People think they're gonna remember all the things that they did, and apparently you remember some of the things that you did.
Because I wrote it down at the time though,
Yeah,
right?
but most of the time, you'll say, "Okay, tell me about some of your accomplishments," and people will look at me and say, "I'm gonna really need to think about this," because they haven't taken the time to think about what they, with their team, with their organization did, and so I think one is pay attention to capture that, to figure out the different spaces where those that can be valuable, and to take that, to being able to be visible means, 1, resume. Another would be interview, if you're interviewing, or where you, and just when you're out there in the world, do you do a good job of talking about what you do?
Mm.
Do you introduce yourself to people and what your organization does? People do a horrible job at that.
One trick I've learned in networking is I always find one project I'm working on that I can talk about that will tee up something I would love to sell to that person, or something I would love to do with that person. I find a way to have, like, I kind of try to think about it in advance. Sorry, I just gave away one of my networking things, but I think that helps open up the conversation in a really natural way. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, so I think going, building off what you just said, thinking about your brand almost.
Mhm.
So, how do you introduce yourself formally and informally? Are you keeping up with your resume? And I would tell everybody, you should, even if you don't think you're going to use it right now, go build or update your resume.
I've got some thoughts on this when you finish.
Um, if you're going to go on an interview, be queued up with those, uh, and ready to talk about some of the impact that you've had. And ideally, when we're talking about this, it's being able to share that in a way that makes sense for the conversation you're in. So, how I share my accomplishments and line it up with this organization that I'm trying to go to work for, or this person that I wanna partner with or do business with, like, it matters having that stuff in your back pocket, but then adjusting how you share that when you share that. I think all those things, can be important, but it starts with you might need to take a little time and actually think about that. And then I would say it translates too to if look, when you apply for things, they're gonna look you up on LinkedIn and on Facebook, and so what are the things that you post? How does that support, your accomplishments and who you are, the way you describe yourself, the things you post, the things that you comment on, all those things weigh into, having a consistent, um, brand or what you're putting out there. There's a saying, "You're always auditioning for something, whether you know it or not."
That's right.
And I think that's a great thing to think about right now. You're already interviewing. Maybe it's for your next job, maybe it's for someone wanting to work for you or with you. And so if you think about it like that, and you think you're always auditioning for something, then it makes a lot of sense. The first 2 things we talked about, which is to have a lot of to build and invest in relationships, and it also then makes a lot of sense for you to be, um, showing that you're good at what you do, that you can adjust, that you can change to meet the moment.
I'm gonna go on 2 quick tangents. One is I did a training with an organization recently that, it when you were talking about keeping your resume up to date, it reminded me of this. I trained them to create something called a BAMF binder. It stands for Bad Ace Mother Effort, and BAMF
F.
BAMF binder. And this is something that a former boss had me create when I was starting my career. And what we added to the BAMF binder was anytime I got one of those emails that says, you crushed it. Great job. Add it to the BAMF binder. When I put together my annual report, it went in the BAMF binder. Even if I would create, let's say, a campaign piece that was going out and it was a really successful campaign, I would put an example of that piece in there and then the stats for what its performance looked like. And that went in my BAMF binder. Awards went in the BAMF binder, everything. And so then, and any major projects, I would kind of do a one page write up. What was the impact? How many people? What was the scope and scale? So in interviews, I used to have this giant, I don't do it anymore, but I used to have this binder that I would pull out and somebody would say, "Can you give me an example of a time you problem solving or whatever?" I'd flip open my BAMF binder and say, "Here's an example of a project." And I'd have these like leave behinds. And I know that's so extra, right? but like I only had to do it a couple of times to give myself the confidence to be able to reference it mentally, right? Like, it was a way of kind of mentally organizing for myself all of the accomplishments and keeping up with it. So then over time, I just would review it and refresh myself and have those examples in my mind. But there was something about early on having that physical kind of representation of my accomplishments that helped me get through the interview process with confidence. The other thing that I thought you were gonna say as you were talking, because you were kind of, like, ticking through it, is, PIE, the acronym for, projects, image, and exposure, which is an acronym that, we use for leaders to help create visibility. So projects identifying projects that are aligned with the bottom line of the organization and really have impact, and then image, how do you look and present yourself? What's your brand? Like you said, how are you describing yourself, introducing yourself when you meet with the CEO? How are you presenting yourself online? What are you wearing physically? Do you look polished and put together and have that executive presence? And then exposure are those opportunities to demonstrate your projects and impact and in your executive presence.
No, I'm actually glad that you described pie because I really liked it when, you first introduced it. I think we say it in a lot of different ways, but pie is great. So, um, I think that's spot on. And just this week, I was with a healthcare company, and we were talking about managing your career. These are people who are part of the succession plan in a growing organization. And I said, say yes, right? Especially right now, say yes to the new, pay attention to the new stuff, say yes to the new stuff, get involved in the new stuff. We said that in the beginning of this conversation, but that fits great with pie because every time we say yes to doing something we've never done before, or we take on a developmental, we call them developmental events or experiences, which are really important to growth, whether you're in a changing environment or not. Three things can happen when we say yes to things and we do new things. One, we're probably going to build a skill, some sort of technical, functional, clinical, to whatever you do. You're going to build some sort of skill, whether that's now I know financials more, or now I know more about the safety and or whatever. You're going to learn something probably. The second thing that's going to happen is you are going to broaden your business acumen because you're going to be connecting a dot outside of your normal space. And what we know is the people who can connect the dots, people who have a broader view of anything, are going to make better decisions. They're going to be more able to contribute and add value. And then the last thing that happens is every time you do something new, and this fits right into pie in our conversation today, every time you do something new, you are going to meet people and work with people who you've not worked with before. And that broadened network is going to be very helpful. So whether it's pie or we call these like saying yes to development events and experiences, because you know how it goes. Somebody comes to you like, Adrian, hey, we want to put you on this task force. Adrian, do you want to be on this? And you probably, Adrian, are going to say yes to that. But a lot of people are going to be like, do these people know how much I have to do? Right? Like I've got enough on my plate.
So how do people balance that? How do you find the balance between saying yes and not getting totally burned out in this moment?
Yeah, I think there's two risks. One is getting burned out. I think the other risk is taking on something that is important and high vis and then not being able to deliver on it. And so anytime we do new things, there's risk and reward in that. And so you got to be good sometimes in that first time situation and contribute at the level that you need to. And so, yeah, when we talk about uh, how do you say yes to things when you might be already feeling overloaded? I would say that you might have to look and say, why am I overloaded? And I find a lot of people, and having just spent the earlier part of this week with a client, I find many people are not using their resources and not using their teams. And by the way, plug for AI. How can AI help get some over the road and things off your plate so that you can be more deeply involved in other things, right? And so I would say use your resources. Are you delegating? I will tell you the answer to that is often not enough or not at all. And then the third thing is what's a value add in this whole thing? Adrian, would you say that AI has made you able to do more?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say the same thing. In fact, I've been really busy the last few weeks, and I would say that I'm not sure if I would have been able to pull off some of the things that I pulled off if I hadn't been able to use AI as almost like my intern and to help me get somewhere faster. And then I get to use my time to actually be with clients and to be solving real problems
Yeah.
that are impacting them.
I love that. I think that's a great place to um, wrap up. So, to tie everything kind of back together, um, number one, I think what I heard from you is you absolutely can have career security in the age of AI. Will you run back through the three things that people need to do?
Be good at what you do, and being good at what you do sometimes is really simple. It's keeping up, it's trying things, it's paying attention to what's happening in your industry and in your work, and getting ahead of the curve, as you said. The second thing is spend the time and energy, deepening your relationships, building more reciprocal relationships. You will never regret, I don't think, deepening and building more reciprocal relationships. I just don't think you will. I think you're gonna find that it is huge for having access to information and people and the things that you need to be successful. And I think the third thing is being good at talking about your accomplishments and your impact.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Um, and just to completely close out, um, one of the ways that we like to develop is through reflection questions. So, a few reflection questions that someone might ask themselves to assess if they are kind of hardy in this moment. One, I always ask this in interviews, but what's the last thing you learned? Number two, who would go to bat for me tomorrow? I think your question of what are those 200 people in your reciprocal network is great. Like, go through that exercise. And then third, can I explain my impact clearly with numbers, with examples? Can I articulate the scope and scale of the impact that I'm making? And if your answer is no, then what I heard from you is take the time to do that, write it down, and get clear on it. Um, so, is there anything else you want to add to the conversation before we wrap up?
I think we covered it.
Okay, cool. So this is hopefully part of a three-part series around leading in AI. So this first one was around managing your career. The next one, we're hoping to talk about leading teams in the age of AI. And then we're going to be talking about how do you lead as an organization and really solve the technological problems that are coming. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.